She has experience working with children and families across a range of developmental, behavioral, and psychological concerns and has worked in both clinical and educational settings. Through her work, Priyanka has developed a particular interest in understanding children, not just as individuals, but with the relationships and environments that shape their development. She's passionate about helping parents and caregivers better understand the needs underlying children's behavior and supporting them in creating more nurturing and responsive environment. We are happy to have her with us today. Please join me in welcoming Priyanka Bara. Participants, kindly note that we shall be taking the questions towards the end of the session. So in case while the session is going on, I would request all of y'all to turn off your mic and your cameras. And if y'all have any doubts in between the session, y'all can just put it in the chat box, which we will be taking it towards the end of the session. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Arva ma'am. I just want to ask if my screen is visible. Okay.
Yes, Priyanka.
Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. I'm so glad to see you all here. Thank you for joining in, and I hope we'll have a great learning today. When we think about the relationship that shape a child, we often think about parents, teachers, friends, and later partners. But there is one relationship that begins very early, develops alongside us, and often stays with us for most of our lives: the sibling relationship. It is a relationship that can teach us how to share, negotiate, compete, forgive, protect, and sometimes even how to fight. Interestingly, it is also a relationship that parents can influence without realizing it. Today is a part one of our two-part series on sibling relationships, where we will focus on understanding the basics: why sibling relationships matter, what shapes them, and how family dynamics, parenting, etc., can influence them. Before we look at what parents can do, let's first understand what makes this relationship so complex but important. And because sibling relationships are something many of us have experienced personally, I want to begin by bringing that personal experience into the room. Before we put on our parents, teachers, educators, or professional hats, I invite you to take them off for a few minutes. Let's go back to being the child, the brother, the sister, the person who was actually living through these relationships. Rather than analyzing the relationship, let's simply remember what it felt like to be in one. So I request you all to please close your eyes for a moment and think about your own sibling relationships, if you have siblings. Hello, sorry, am I audible?
Yes, ma'am, you are.
Yes. So sorry. So now that I have you in that zone, I want you to ask a few questions. What is your strongest memory with your sibling? Did you ever feel jealous? Did you ever feel your sibling was treated differently? Who did your parents seem closer to? What is your relationship like today? How many of you remembered both positive and difficult times? This is important because sibling relationships are rarely purely positive or purely negative. They are complex, emotional, and deeply influential. So, now let's understand why this relationship matters so much in a child's development and why psychologists like Judy Dune have described siblings as some of our early peers. Judy Dune is one of the pioneers in sibling relationship research. Before her work, developmental psychologists focused primarily on the parent child relationship, often overlooking the influence of siblings. Dune challenged this perspective by demonstrating that siblings play a fundamental role in children's social and emotional development. Dune described siblings as a child's first peer relationship, and I think the word peer here is really important. With parents, there is naturally an imbalance. We are the adults, we set the rules, we explain, we teach, and we guide. But with siblings, children are often interacting with someone who is much closer to their age. They're deciding who gets to use the toy first, who gets to sit where, whose turn it is, what game they are going to play, and what happens when one person doesn't agree. Imagine two siblings playing a board game. One child suddenly says, "That's not fair. You changed the rules." Now, on the surface level, this looks like a completely ordinary sibling fight. But something important is happening underneath. They're learning to communicate. This is what I think happened. They're learning to understand another person's perspective. Maybe my sister didn't realize she changed the rules. They're learning negotiation. Okay, let's start again. And sometimes they're learning something equally important: how to repair a relationship after conflict. So, when we look at the sibling relation interactions through Dune's lens, we don't only see fighting, we see opportunities for social learning. Social competence. Think about a child who wants to play with the older sibling, but the older sibling says, "No, I'm playing with my friends." The younger child has to figure out, how do I approach them? How do I ask? When should I give them space? What can I do if they say no? These are very basic social skills, but children practice them repeatedly with siblings. And unlike a structured social skills session, this learning happens naturally, sometimes dozens of times in a week. Empathy. Imagine a sibling comes home from school upset because they weren't invited to a friend's birthday party. The other sibling may not have the perfect words to comfort them, but they do begin to learn. Something has happened to my brother. He is upset. What can I do? Over time, children start recognizing facial expressions, tone of voice, emotions, and perspectives that are different from their own. Siblings don't just learn what they feel, they learn that someone else can feel differently from them. This is probably the easiest one for parents to relate to. And of course, siblings fight. "That's mine. You touched my stuff. She got more than me. He went first." We may sometimes see these arguments as something we need to immediately stop. But some level of conflict actually gives children a space to practice negotiation. Two children both want the same television show. They could scream, they could come to the parent, or they could negotiate. "You watch this for 20 minutes and I'll choose the next one." That tiny negotiation is actually a social skill that they will need much later in friendships, classrooms, companionships, workplaces, and relationships. Of course, this doesn't mean that all sibling conflict is beneficial. If there is bullying, intimidation, physical aggression, or a persistent power imbalance, adults need to step in. The point is that ordinary, manageable disagreements can become a learning opportunity. Self esteem. Sibling relationships can also influence how children see themselves. Imagine an older sibling saying, "You're actually good at drawing. Can you teach me how to do that?" That's a very small interaction, But for the younger child, it can communicate something powerful. I'm good at something. My sibling values what I can do. But the opposite can also happen. If a child repeatedly hears, your brother is the smart one and you are the sporty one, even something that sounds positive can become a limiting label. Of course, sibling relationships don't determine how someone will behave in every future relationship. There are many other influences: parents, peers, temperament, culture, and later experiences. But sibling interactions can provide one of the earliest places where children repeatedly practice these skills. So, when Judy Doon called siblings the child's first peer relationship, she wasn't simply saying that siblings are the first people children play with. She was pointing towards something much bigger. The sibling relationship becomes one of the earliest places where children practice being in a relationship with another person. They learn how to share space, manage differences, understand another person's feelings, deal with the conflict, and find their place within the relationship. And importantly, they learn all of this not only through the good moments, but also through the difficult ones. And this brings us to something very important in Doon's work. Conflict itself isn't necessarily a bad thing. Siblings are going to disagree. They may argue over toys, attention, rules, personal space, or simply because they want different things. And while our instinct as adults may be to stop the argument and step in, not every argument needs to be prevented. When the conflict is manageable and happens within a supportive family environment, it can actually become a space for learning. Children get opportunities to practice problem solving, negotiation, taking, emotional regulation, apologizing, and repairing the relationship. For example, two siblings may argue whose turn it is. If they are able to eventually negotiate, calm down, and find a solution, they have learned something from that conflict. So perhaps the goal isn't to raise siblings who never fight. Instead, the goal is to help children learn how to disagree without hurting the relationship. But there is an important boundary here. Not all conflict is healthy or something children should be expected to manage on their own. Persistent bullying, intimidation, humiliation, or significant power imbalance requires adults to step in and provide safety and guidance. So, what we are really looking at is the difference between everyday disagreements that can become opportunities for learning and harmful patterns of conflict that requires adult intervention. And this brings us to the next question. If siblings are learning from these everyday interactions, how does the family environment influence what they learn? And this is where Suzanne McCall's work becomes particularly important. Building on Doon's work, developmental psychologist Susan McKell shifted the focus from individual children to a broader family context. Rather than asking, why do siblings fight? She asked, what is happening in the family that influences how siblings relate to one another? Sibling relationships don't develop in isolation, they are embedded within the larger family environment. Children are constantly observing how parents communicate, how disagreements are handled, how affection and attention is expressed, how differences between family members are responded to. This means that when we look at sibling conflict, we shouldn't immediately assume there is simply because the children have different personalities or don't get along. The way parents respond to conflict, distribute attention, set boundaries, and communicate with each other and the child can all become part of the sibling dynamic. So, what does this mean for us as parents? Children don't just learn about relationships through what we tell them, they also learn by watching how relationships are handled around them. When parents model warmth, respect, fairness, healthy communication, children begin to see that differences can be expressed safely, disagreements can be managed, and relationships can remain connected even when people don't agree. The experiences can create a foundation for more positive and supportive sibling relationships. On the other hand, when children regularly experience criticism, comparison, favoritism, or unresolved conflict, the sibling relationship can begin to feel more competitive. A repeated message like, why can't you be more like your sister? Can unintentionally position one child as the standard and the other as the one who falls short. Over time, the sibling can become associated with the competition rather than the connection. And this is where Mikhail's perspective becomes important. When we see siblings fighting, instead of looking only at what one child is doing to the other, we can widen the lens and ask, what is happening around these children? And this is an important shift for parents. We are not just responding to the sibling relationship, we are also helping create an environment in which that relationship develops. And this idea of looking beyond the individual child brings us to another important perspective, Murray Bowen's family systems theory, which takes this even further by looking at the family as an interconnected emotional system where each person's emotion, behavior, and relationships can influence the others. A simple way to think about it is think of a domino. When one part moves, the other parts are affected as well. Similarly, when something changes in one part of the family, it can create changes everywhere. For example, if a parent is experiencing high stress, it may affect how they respond to their children. That may influence one child's behavior, which may then affect the sibling, which can create further tension within the family. So, what may appear to be a simple sibling conflict can sometimes be part of a larger emotional pattern within the family. This is why factors such as parental stress, inconsistent discipline, communication patterns, unresolved tension, and changes in one relationship can influence how siblings relate to each other. Bowen's perspective therefore encourages us to look beyond the immediate behavior and ask what is happening within the family system that may be influencing the interaction. And this connects with what we discussed through Susan McKell, but there is a subtle difference in the two perspectives. McKell focuses on the family context that shapes the sibling relationship, whereas Bowen focuses on the interconnectedness of the entire family system and how relationships influence one another. So, McKell helps us widen the lens around the sibling relationship. Bowen helps us see the family as a whole system in which every relationship is connected. And with these perspectives together, we can begin to see sibling conflict not simply as a parenting problem to eliminate, but as something that can give us insight into children's relationship, their needs, and the larger family environment. So far, we have looked at the sibling relationship as something shaped by interactions between children and by the wider family system. Alfred Adler gives us another interesting lens. He draws our attention to the fact that even children growing up in the same family don't necessarily experience the family in the same way. Adler believed that a child's position in the family can influence how they experience that family, the role they take on, and how they see themselves in relation to others. Take the firstborn child. For some period of time, they are the only child and receive their parents' undivided attention. They are also the first child through whom parents experience parenthood. So, parents may be more cautious, closely monitor milestones, or have certain expectations. When a younger sibling arrives, the child's position changes. They now have to share parental attention and may suddenly be expected to be more responsible or the older one. So their experience isn't simply about being firstborn, it's about the role and expectations that develop around that position. The middle child has a different experience. They grow up with both an older and younger sibling. So they may find themselves navigating different relationships within the family. They may look up to the older sibling, while also being looked up by the younger sibling. Depending on the family, this position may encourage negotiation, adaptability, or finding their own space and identity. But again, these are possibilities, not guarantees. The youngest child may enter a family where older siblings are already more independent. Parents may be more relaxed and experienced by this stage. And older siblings may also help protect or sometimes even speak for the youngest. In some families, this can mean greater protection or indulgence. In others, the youngest may actually have to work harder to establish their space among older siblings. What about an only child? They have a totally different family experience. They don't have siblings with whom to share parental attention or negotiate everyday life. Much of their early interactions may therefore be with adults, and they may experience both the advantages and pressures that come with being the sole focus of their parents. Now, this is where we need to bring Edler's ideas into a modern perspective. It's important to understand what Edler was and wasn't saying. He wasn't suggesting that being firstborn automatically makes someone responsible, or that being the youngest automatically makes someone dependent. These are possible tendencies based on the child's experience and position within the family, not fixed personality traits. While birth order can influence a child's experience within the family, contemporary research suggests that its influence or personality is relatively small. Two children with the same birth order can also have completely different experiences depending on the parents, temperament, family circumstances, age gaps, and the role that develops within the family. So, Edler's contribution is really about family position and subjective experience, recognizing that even when children share the same parents and home, they can occupy very different places within that family and therefore experience it differently. So, rather than thinking she is behaving this way because she is the youngest, we can ask what experiences has the child had within their family that might be shaping this behavior. Birth order can give lens for understanding family experiences, but it shouldn't become a label or an explanation for a child's personality. Let's put all of these ideas together with a quick case. Two siblings argue every day after school. Their mother believes they simply have opposite personalities. If Judy Doon, Susan McKell, Murray Barwin, and Alfred Edler were sitting in this room, would they all look at this situation the same way? Probably not. So, what questions would each of them ask? You're welcome to give your responses in the chat box, or if you're comfortable, you can unmute and you can answer.
Power of questioning.
Yes, ma'am? Okay. So, if Judy Doon was in this room, she would most probably ask, what are these children learning through their everyday interactions? She would be interested in the interaction itself, how they play, disagree, negotiate, respond to one another, and what these experiences may be teaching them. She would encourage us to look at parenting, differential treatment, comparisons, family climate, and how parents respond to sibling conflict. Whereas if Susan McHale was here, she would ask, how are the parents responding to the conflict? What is happening in the family environment that may be influencing how these siblings relate to each other? If Mure Bhavin would have been here, he would ask, what is happening in the family system that may be contributing? He would look at the interconnected relationships and emotional processes within the family, not just the two siblings. At last, if Alfred Adler was here, he would ask, what roles have these children taken on within the family? And how might their positions influence their experience? He would be interested in each child's place within the family, their subjective experience, and the roles they may have taken on. So, now that we have looked at some of the different lenses through which we can understand sibling relationships, let's bring this into a more everyday family situation. Let's look at what happens when these dynamics begin to play out in a child's everyday experience at home. Arav is 10 and his sister Meera is 8. Whenever guests visit, their parents proudly talk about Arav's academic achievements. Meera is often told, you should learn from your brother. Recently, Meera has become irritable and frequently argues with Arav. What do you think is happening here? Why might Meera be reacting this way? Again, you are welcome to drop in your answers in the chat box, or if you are comfortable, you can unmute the mic and we can have the discussion.
Priyanka ma'am, there are some responses in the chat box. One is that she might have a sense of jealousy towards her brother. Second is she wants her skills also to be praised by parents. And then she's being put down always.
Okay, thank you for the responses. You have correctly guessed it. The first thing we see is something that comes quite naturally to the children: social comparison. Children often look at people around them to understand where they stand. And siblings are especially easy to compare with because they share the same parents, same home, and often similar opportunities. So Meera may not simply be hearing Arav is doing well. She may gradually start thinking Arav is the one who is good at things, and I am the one who isn't. And when parents repeatedly make the comparison, even with good intentions, the siblings can unintentionally become the benchmark against which the child measures themselves. The problem isn't the child noticing differences. That's natural. The concern is when comparison becomes the way a child understands their own worth or abilities. So instead of, why can't you be more like Arav, we can shift towards, let's look at what you are working on and how you have grown. But there is something else Meera may be experiencing here, and what was pointed out through the responses as well. It may not only be about who is better or more successful. She may also be wondering, if my brother gets praised more, does that mean he is more important to my parents? And this brings us to the second concept. Perceived favoritism. Children don't necessarily need parents to treat them exactly the same. In fact, that's often impossible. A 10-year-old and an 8-year-old will have different needs, and two children may need very different kinds of support. What children are particularly sensitive to is fairness and belonging. This can become especially noticeable when one child, often the younger child, is perceived as receiving more attention, protection, affection, or leniency. For example, parents may naturally be more protective of a younger kid, give them more help, or excuse behaviors that they would expect the older sibling to manage independently. The intention may simply be they are younger, so they need more help. But the older child may experience it very differently. My sibling gets away with things that I don't, or my parents care more about them than they care about me. Over time, if this pattern is repeated, the child may begin to feel overlooked, less valued, or resentful towards the sibling. They may also start to compete for parental attention or feel that they have to be more responsible or better to receive the same appreciation. At the same time, the younger child can also be affected. If they are consistently protected, excused, or treated as baby, they may come to rely on that role and find it harder to develop independence. So, a parent may have a completely reasonable explanation for treating two children differently. But what matters is also how the different experiences are experienced by each child. Sometimes the most important question isn't only, am I being fair? But also, does my child experience my actions as fair, valued, and loving? And when these experiences happen repeatedly, something can even develop within families. We start giving children certain identities and roles. And this brings us to family labels. You might hear things like, he's the responsible, you are the naughty one, he's the smart one, she's the sensitive one. These descriptions can start very casually. But when a child hears the same message again and again, it becomes a part of how they understand themselves. And once these roles become established, we may unconsciously continue responding to children according to the role we have given them. Instead of saying, you are the responsible one, we can describe what we actually observed. You handled the responsibility really well today. That small shift matters because we are appreciating a behavior without turning it into a child's identity. The same applies to challenging behavior. Instead of, you are the naughty one, we can say, that behavior wasn't okay, but we can work on what happened. The child is not the behavior, and the sibling is not the standard against which the child needs to be measured. So, in this one small family situation, we can see how quickly these processes can connect. A child is compared with a sibling. Comparison can create a sense of competition. Differences in attention may be experienced as favoritism, and over time, children can begin to take on fixed roles within the family. And this is why the small things we say and do at home can have a much bigger impact on how siblings see themselves and each other. As we come towards the end of this section, I want us to go back to where we started with our own sibling relationships. Most of us probably remembered moments of laughter, closeness, and shared experiences, but perhaps also moments of jealousy, comparison, competition, or feeling that things were unfair. And this is what exactly makes sibling relationships so unique. They don't have to be perfect to be meaningful. As parents, our goal is to make our children stop fighting, never feel jealous, or always get along. Conflict is a natural part of growing together. What matters is what children learn from these moments of conflict and what they experience around them. So instead of asking, How do I stop my children from fighting? Perhaps we can begin asking, what are my children learning about relationships through the way we handle their conflicts? Are they learning that they have to compete for our attention? Are they learning that being the better child earns more love? Are they learning that their sibling is a rival? Or are they learning that they can disagree, express themselves, listen to each other, repair, hurt, and still remain connected? And I think this is where parents have a really powerful role. You don't have to treat each child exactly the same. You don't have to eliminate every disagreement. You don't have to be a perfect parent. Sometimes simply noticing the small things can make a difference. The comparison we stop making, the label we choose not to use, the child's perspective we pause to hear, the conflict we allow them to work through, and the reassurance we give when a child feels left behind. Because ultimately, we are not just raising two or three individual children, we are also helping shape a relationship that may continue long after they have left our homes. So perhaps the question we can take with us today is, what kind of sibling relationship am I helping my children build? Not a relationship without conflict, but one where there is respect, safety, understanding, room for individuality, and the ability to come back to each other even after difficult moments. And that, I think, is one of the most meaningful things we can give to our children. Thank you for being here, for reflecting, and most importantly, for being willing to look at these relationships a little differently. In part 1, we took a step back and explored what sibling relationships are, why they matter, and how these factors such as family dynamics, comparisons, favoritism, birth order, or individual differences can shape them. But understanding the relationship is only the first step. The bigger question is, what can we do to support it? In part 2, we'll move from understanding to action. We'll explore sibling relationships in neurodivergent families, look at experiences, and most importantly, discuss what parents and caregivers can do to build a relationship that are more supportive, respectful, and resilient. Because the goal isn't to never make siblings fight. It's to help them how to navigate these relationships even when things get difficult. Thank you.
Thank you, Priyanka ma'am, for such a wonderful session. Participants, please note that the forum is now open for questions. So, in case if you all have any questions, please feel free to either unmute yourself and ask the question, or you can either put it in the chat box.
There is already a comment in the chat box by Sangeeta. Sangeeta says, like in olden times, there were about 10 or 12 children growing up together, and no child except the first one, receives the special treatment. And sometimes many generations, multiple generations, all grow up together because of joint families. So, it's a very different situation compared to the more nuclear families we have right now. Priyanka, do you want to comment on that?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Sangeeta, ma'am. So it's not that these things didn't exist earlier. It was just that maybe we didn't notice them. For example, if we take example of our parents, they were 10, 12 siblings altogether. And now in nuclear family, we are just two or maximum three siblings. I'm not talking about the joint families or the cousins, but just the blood relationship siblings. Earlier, uh, the older sibling would have to be the responsible one, would have to grow up before even they aged. They would have to take on responsibilities like taking care of their older siblings, because even the parents were so busy in their work and they couldn't take care of the other siblings because they had so many children to look after. So automatically that burden, that responsibility fell on the older siblings shoulders, which is not the case now. Now it's more about growing up together, and parents make sure to try to make sure that both the children receive their attention, they don't feel neglected. But often it might be that we are unintentionally, subconsciously doing things that might make either the older sibling or the younger one feel as if they are neglected or they are not favored by the parents. And that's what exactly what we will learn in part 2, like what are the things that parents can do in their own abilities to maintain and harbor more uh, growing, evolving, and natural and healthy relationship among siblings. I hope I have answered your question, Sangeeta ma'am.
Also, to add to what Priyanka said, in olden days, of course, there were more people at home. Uh, the sibling relationship sometimes ceased to be, just brother and sister. It could be, a more parental role that the older siblings were taking. That's what Priyanka was saying. With multi-generational families, one other unique thing that oftentimes we've heard of is like somebody saying, oh, I was closest to my aunt, or I all my secrets my cousin I would share with, or my uncle or aunt was my best friend, because they are then seen as siblings because of the same age or because you could relate to them, and multiple other family members would take on the role of families. So these dynamics still existed then, maybe not as pronounced as it is now, because there's just the three people or four people in a house, and everything sort of is noticed by everyone else. Whereas in olden days, with so many people, it would get scattered and lost often, and parents, like Priyanka rightly pointed out, did not have the time to even process this. So a lot of things would go unnoticed. It was not that it didn't exist. These things did exist, but they probably never mattered because there was so much happening always. Sangeeta again
Yes,
said,
Sangeeta ma'am also mentioned.
yeah,
So, sibling relationship is about learning to agree our disagreements.
Yes, exactly, ma'am. Sibling relationship is not about understanding that, okay, I'm right or you are wrong, but it is coexisting amongst our rights and wrongs. I might be right, you might be wrong, but then we coexist, understanding that, okay, your point of view is also valid and so is mine, and it is rightly pointed by you.
If you all have any other questions, please feel free to put it them in the chat box, or you can unmute yourself and ask.
I can see one question, rather a statement that is pointed out by Sangeeta ma'am. Yes, I was wondering whether taking responsibility came easier then. Ma'am, from my perspective, I think that time the siblings didn't have a choice on or whether to choose or not to. They were automatically designated that responsibility, that okay, now this is the younger sibling and you have to look after them, we are off to work and you will be the one in charge. Whereas now we see that the children, from their own experiences, through school, through the friendships they make, they understand that okay, I am an individual and I have my own choices, And I am like, I'm not wrong if I make any choices of my own. They have got, like, through experiences at such young age, they have gotten that exposure that okay, they are an individual, and at this age they have this choice to whether or not be a guardian. They have the choice to be a child, which earlier didn't exist. The childhood uh, was somewhere lost, especially for the older siblings. They didn't get to live their childhood. They were burdened with the responsibilities to take care of the other child who was growing up. So yeah, it is rightly pointed out by you.
Are there any other questions? Ma'am, I don't think so. There are any other
Yeah, we can
questions.
wrap
So
up.
I think we
Yeah.
can wrap up. So thank you so much, participants, for joining in for the session. And as Priyanka ma'am pointed out in the beginning, that this is the part one of the series. We have the part two coming ahead, which would be in the next month. That would be in the month of September. Again, the last Friday of the month. The date would be 25th September, same time, 7 p.m. to 8 p.m. And this would be further continued. And probably in the second part, there would be more interesting things that we will be getting to learn and know. So looking forward to the part two as well. So thank you so much, audience, for being a lovely audience, and hope to see you all in the next webinar. That would be the next month, September 25th, 7 p.m. to 8 p.m. The details will again be shared in the group, in our chat groups, and you all will be informed about it as well.
Arwa, there is one question that has come.
Yes, ma'am, sure.
Rishita says at times the younger sibling doesn't prefer being the center of attention, but older sibling feels like that they are not being noticed. So how can we avoid this?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for the question, Rishita, ma'am. So, yeah, that might be a case where the younger child, wanting or not wanting, becomes the center of attention, while the older sibling may or may not be getting the same level of attention from the parents or the elders of the family. So, how can we avoid this? So, this can happen both intentionally and unintentionally. As parents, our first instinct is to save or favor the child who is weak. And in this case, in terms of older or younger siblings, it's mostly the younger sibling, because now the the child is very new to the world. The child is understanding how to function, how to exist in this world. He's exploring things. So the parents, being the first time parents or even the second time parents, they are naturally more protective of that child, and the child may not require that level of attention, or maybe the parent uh, is able to see somewhere that the child is struggling, whereas they see that the older sibling is not. So that through their natural instinct, without even them realizing it, through their gestures, through their conversation, through their actions, they may they may make the younger sibling feel that he is getting the attention, and he doesn't want it. It's the extra attention that he is getting from the parents. And for the older sibling, it may be that, okay, I don't exist maybe in this family, and it's all about the younger sibling. So how do we avoid this is by taking a step back and understanding, letting the child explore. So rather than our first instinct being to save the child, let him fall, let him have that experience of failing, of getting hurt, and then maybe intervene. So maybe we can start to fight our natural instinct, which is basically to save the weaker child, and take a step back to let the child have that experience of their own, because ultimately it is their experiences which will help the child grow. It will shape their personalities, and it will shape their own understanding of themselves. Because every time if we keep helping the child, they might start feeling that I am someone who always needs help, and they may make it about their personalities, and they may in their later relationships in life, maybe even in partners, they may assume that responsibility from the partner, because they have associated that needing help, uh, being the one who is helped role to them, which is so strongly embedded in them that now they expect that from everybody around them. And then again, they will have their own fair share of challenges. So, uh, to sum it up, how do we avoid it? Exactly, to uh, take a step back, to let the child experience first. And if, of course, if it is something that we feel that it is out of the control of child, then maybe we need to intervene, but maybe not. So it would be more about making that conscious decision as parent on whether we want the child to learn, or whether we want to save the child from that hurt, or heartbreak, or that experience altogether.
Yeah, also one of the things that we often do is to tell the older child, you are older, you should
Mm,
sacrifice or you should know better. That is what often causes this hurt. That not only am I being replaced, now suddenly rules are different for me and for the
mm,
younger one, and that hurts, right? So many psychologists often refer to, and Adler in particular refers to the first child as a dethroned king after the birth of the second sibling, right, or the second child, which means that this first sibling was a king or a queen for a period of time, 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, whatever, and then gets removed from the throne, and forever the younger child is now sitting on that throne. So that is a dynamic which
mm,
inadvertently parents play into, uh, and in the hopes that the older child learns to help the younger child adjust, they tend to pass on this message that your younger sibling needs your help and support, which may not be true, right? So instead of a blanket, always the first child has to make the sacrifices and the younger child is needing help, if we can take it on a case by case situation, and oftentimes treat both of them equally, of course keeping their age in mind, but not making blanket statements that you are the older one, you have to sacrifice, or you must learn to be more mature all the time, will not work. So if we could work on that, I think that would also help. Yeah, thank you for that question, Rishita. I think we can wrap up if there aren't any more questions.
Yes, ma'am. There are no further questions so far, so I think we're good to go. And as mentioned earlier, so the part two would be in the next month, that is September 25th, same time, 7 p.m. to 8 p.m.